So just a couple of days ago, you published a report, The Ethics of Defense Technology Development, an Investor's Perspective. Break this down for me.
The central argument that I was making is that it's not simply an ethical choice of whether or not you do work with the government. There's an ethical choice in abstaining from doing that as well. And so the key argument was that we can look at the principles of just war theory going back thousands of years and apply them to the development of emerging technologies to determine whether or not there are things that we can and should be doing to support the national security community, and whether there might be things that damage some of the concepts that emerge from just war theory.
And now you're very focused on defense technologies, defense innovation between Anduril, which you co-founded, and also just some of the other investments you've made within your portfolio, too. But in general, and it's certainly something we've talked about before, the divide, or I guess the lack of intersection between Silicon Valley and D.C. right now, how would you characterize that, and do you think it's actually starting to change?
I think some of the culture has certainly started to shift. There are really complicated questions that are still being worked through, in particular by the large tech platform companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon. A lot of that has been litigated extensively in the media, but I think that by and large there is a great deal of interest in the startup community, in the tech community in Silicon Valley, of kind of returning to the roots of having conversations about doing meaningful work with the government.
What does that mean in terms of investment possibilities and opportunities for someone like you?
I think the challenge to any sort of venture capital economic structure is that it might not make sense for large venture funds to invest in companies unless they have a really high possible ceiling on valuation and market cap. So you see companies like Palantir and SpaceX that are probably the two best examples since the end of the Cold War. The commonalities between those basically put them directly in competition with the primes, the systems integrators like Lockheed, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and so forth. So I think the things that I'm interested in looking at Founders Fund, and what other large venture capital firms like Founders Fund are interested in, are finding these new primes, the next generation companies that are going to come in and compete for programs of record.
Companies like Anduril.
Companies like Anduril.
All right. In terms of those I guess in terms of those potential companies, how much of this is U.S. government based, and how much are the opportunities above and beyond? I think about a company like Anduril with some of the drone technology that's being developed right now. Are there commercial applications as well that maybe didn't exist, dual use technologies that maybe make the sector more attractive than investors are realizing?
Absolutely. I think there's kind of two directions of dual use. You can think of technologies that are developed for commercial purposes and then have dual use application going into the programs of record inside of the department. You also have going the opposite direction, things that are developed primarily working with the government, specifically to the government's need, that they can then be repurposed for commercial applications. I think the latter is more interesting to me than the former. Oftentimes the government has kind of second helpings of whatever is being produced for the commercial sector, and it's not specific enough. And as a result, they end up trying to build a lot of these things custom in-house, which is not good for the taxpayer. These programs generally don't work very well. They're wildly overpriced, and they take way longer than they should. And so the focus that I'm trying to pursue is, let's find the things that are solving specific government needs. And then if those can be turned around to support large industry, oil and gas companies, critical infrastructure, then yeah, we should tackle that as well.
Do you think the government, as we're seeing this shift from hardware to software, do you think the government has its arms around what that means from a contracting standpoint? And I do ask that in part given everything we're seeing with the Jedi controversy and protest, et cetera.
Increasingly so. You see reports that are coming out frequently from the Defense Innovation Board. The Reagan Institute actually just published a report on this, where they're coming to grips with this idea that software engineering talent is not flowing into the department in the ways that engineering talent was flowing into the department during the Cold War. This is a huge gap that needs to be addressed because all of the technologies that are most of the technologies that are going to be applicable to the Department of Defense and the national security technology, while they might have hardware components, will really be defined by software. The F-35 in many ways is a hunk of metal that is defined by millions of lines of software code. And that is increasingly important. And as a result, I think we need to find new ways to recruit and retain top talent in software engineering as we work on these critical programs.